If you are watching this, you have some form of access to a pool of knowledge that, for all practical purposes, can be considered as limitless. Chances are, if you hear about a topic, it is all too easy to get your hands on enough videos, academic papers, podcasts, and articles to satisfy your curiosity. This generally holds true for the classic nerd stuff like science, history, and art, but it is also generally true for other topics, like the vast sea that is popular culture. This is also true for combinations of the two camps: science in popular culture, history in popular culture, and art in popular culture. One large aspect of this last group is the history of dancing in popular culture. You don't have to look too hard to find rhythmic contortion in practically every nook and cranny of popular culture, past and present. Dirty Dancing, Dancing with the Stars, Dance Dance Revolution, Mario Mix. Some dances age quite poorly, like the Hammer Dance, or the Freddy, or the Lambeth Walk. Some dances have transcended the cringe associated with their age to become iconic. Dances like the Cupid Shuffle, the Macarena, the Cotton Eye Joe, or the Chicken Dance are no longer valued for their present cultural relevance, but rather for their persistent communal and social value. One common thread in all of these dances, young and old, fab or drab, is that it only takes a few seconds of searching to learn just about everything you would want to learn about them. But a few months ago, I came across a topic that I am still uncomfortably unknowledgeable about: the dancing plague of 1518. Now, the super duper ultra mega abridged, condensed, concise, swift, and all around short way of describing what happened in that fateful, hot, sweaty, dare I say sensual July is as follows. About 500 years ago, the city of Strasbourg was overtaken with the desire to dance, and to this day, nobody really knows why. Just to be absolutely clear, this phenomenon is referred to as a plague because the compulsion to dance spread like the plague. There is no consensus as to whether or not this was an actual biological disease. Now, if you want more information on the whats and the whys and the hows, a quick YouTube search shows that there is no shortage of videos on this topic, so I suggest you dive right in. That's because, to be perfectly honest, I'm not interested in talking about the dancing plague of 1518. I want to talk about the Wikipedia article for the dancing plague of 1518. If you spend enough time watching YouTube videos about the dancing plague of 1518, you'll start hearing many of the same claims, a lot of which I didn't mention in my super duper ultra mega abridged, condensed, concise, swift, and all around short way of describing what happened in that fateful, hot, sweaty, dare I say sensual July. To name a few, it was started by a woman named Frau Torfia. A lot of people died getting jiggy with it, and the local authorities eventually tried putting on what was essentially ye old Woodstock to get people which numbered around 400 to dance the affliction out of their systems. Musicians, stages, the works. So to get a bit more variety in your educational diet, one might consider going to the Wikipedia article for the plague to try to pick up anything that slipped through the collective consciousness of YouTube. And yeah, it was pretty much all the exact same. Although to be fair, there was a bit more detail on the fungus theory, the theory that the citizens of Strasbourg were dancing because they were unknowingly tripping balls on some dank wheat. Part of me was resigned not to give up. Maybe it was my craving for more knowledge or the haunting screams of every teacher I had growing up that Wikipedia is not a credible source. So I went down to the references section and started clicking. The first citation took me to discovery.com, and I thought, okay, well, cool, Discovery, August 1st, 2008. Seems fairly legit, and Shark Week is pretty dope. Let's see what you got. Admittedly, I read a bit more leisurely, haphazardly than I would have liked, but it seemed like an entertaining read. After the standard introductory fanfare, which at that point I could have summarized by heart, the article discusses some different theories before transitioning to some other examples of mass hysteria throughout the ages. It was around this transition that I had a moment of lucidity and was struck by a name that I had been glossing over this whole time. Waller. Waller? Who's Waller? I went back to the first page and hit Control F. Waller had already been mentioned 8 times in the article. Out of the 20 times the article's text mentions one of the 5 cited experts by name, Waller makes up 11 of those mentions. Like, what? How did I miss this? And the first mention? Quote, historian John Waller, author of the forthcoming book A Time to Dance, A Time to Die, The Extraordinary Story of the Dancing Plague of 1518, studied the illness at length and has solved the mystery. End quote. I see. This article is a marketing tool. Thanks for nothing, Discovery. You can keep your sharks, as dope as they are. I'm moving on. So I thought to myself, okay, no worries. There's a whole list of citations. I'm sure just even the next one will be so much more reassuring. Citation 2. A Forgotten Plague, Making Sense of Dancing Mania by a Mr. John Waller. Citation 3, I don't know French, but I can sure read Waller, more on that later. Citation 4, Waller, John. The first 7 citations of the article's 12 references are either papers written by John Waller or largely, if not entirely, about John Waller and his new book at the time. 2 of these citations are repeats of the other citations within the 7. Citations 8 through 11 talk about movement disorders on a more general basis, and citation 12 is a cultural reference to the game Crusader Kings 2. What? Keep in mind that this is supposedly the most extensively documented case of dancing mania ever. But if that's the case, where is the abundance of documentation? And of the documentation given, why does almost all of it come back to Waller from August of 2008 to February of 2009? It was at this point I remembered I could just use the Wikipedia approach on the 2 Waller papers cited in the article. You know, use his bibliographies to dig one level deeper to see if there's anything that isn't parroted in his papers and therefore Wikipedia. Sure, at that point we'd be abstracted away from the core Wikipedia article, but at least we get a handle on how plausible John Waller's claims are without buying or renting that book, because I don't really want to spend money on this. I'm doing this for fun, I guess would be the best way to label it. Okay, let's see here. Paper number 1, A Forgotten Plague Making Sense of Dancing Mania, and no references. Wait, no references? You can just say something in a paper and not present any literature to back you up? Alright, what about number 2? In a Spin, The Mysterious Dancing Epidemic of 1518. Okay, good. 8 references is more helpful than 0 references. Actually, the first source on that paper turned out to be extremely helpful. Religious Dances in the Christian Church and in Popular Medicine. Eugene Backman, 1952. An entire chapter is dedicated to dance epidemics of the 16th century. And most of that chapter unpacks not only the dancing plague of 1518, but also the history of records kept about that event. Score. One thing that is not so score-worthy is that a lot of the main sources were either lost forever or were written long after the fact. According to this book, Daniel Specklin, born 1536, began writing a Strasbourg Chronicle in 1587, the original of which was burned down in the Franco-German War of 1870. Copies were made beforehand, but ultimately the reconstructions of the chronicles were, quote, in their main outlines, quote, or not in their entirety. Another source was Sebastian Brandt, who was a secretary of the Council of Strasbourg during the crisis. Okay, that seems promising. The first truly primary source we've seen so far. He wrote some annals that apparently were also burned in 1870. The council minutes upon which the annals were based are also lost to history. Before all of this went down, however, a Mr. Jacques Wencker, born 1668, copied these annals. Also, the book claims more than 50 people danced, a threshold far below the 400 number that Waller totes. Now, we're getting too far away from the Wikipedia article, which is supposed to be the actual topic of this video. In short, it seems that there is a large emphasis on secondary sources for the simple fact that many of the primary sources have been destroyed. But even if I were to get a hold of these records, I definitely wouldn't be able to read them. And if you're thinking I need to refamiliarize myself with Google Translate, let me refamiliarize you with William Shakespeare. You know, the guy whose plays were written so long ago that you had to use a side-by-side translation book in order to understand what the heck is going on. His plays were written well after 1518. So I imagine that not only would those primary records be clouded by language, but also time. Lots and lots of time. Wait, what am I doing? Google Translate. I could use Google Translate to read the French citation from Wikipedia. Just as a reminder, citation 3 by one Elizabeth Clementz was used in the Wikipedia article to point out that there isn't really any primary evidence from Strasbourg that suggests that people died, which hugely contradicts Waller's claims. I can already tell this is going to get juicy with 3 C's. Wait, juky? Nope, I hate it. Moving on. So this text was a review on Waller's book, A Time to Dance, A Time to Die, The Extraordinary Story of the Dancing Plague of 1518, the one from the beginning, the Discovery article. Now, I had read a few of these reviews, but nothing was really noteworthy. As I started reading, I realized that she was my new hero in this saga. Now, in the exposition, Clementz starts off super tame. She lists 3 contemporary sources that should form the cornerstone of any discussion on the Dancing Plague of 1518. 1. The Annals of Brandt. Okay, that's awesome. We came across that source earlier. He was the guy who served as the secretary for the Council of Strasbourg. 2. The Chronicle of Hieronymus Gebweiler. I hadn't previously heard of him, but a quick Google search suggested he wasn't really mentioned often, certainly not in English texts. From what I was able to find, he worked at a local school. And 3. A document or correspondence of sorts sent from the local magistrate to the bishop. Hadn't heard of this one either. After this, however, Clementz, in a pretty impressively professional manner for what she's doing, tears down Waller's book peg by peg. She points out that there was no indication that patient 0 was named Frau Trophea. Waller got this name from Paracelsus, someone who tried documenting the plague several years after the fact. Frau is essentially the German version of Ms., and Clementz points out that Trophea isn't really a name that would make sense for the place or time. After looking around a bit, I found one possible explanation that Paracelsus was actually going for a play on words in Greek.
Trophy. Trophy.
Looks like we might have a little prankster, a little class clown on our hands. Clementz goes on to assert that in his book, Waller editorializes the account of probably not Frau Trophea. She was all diminished by insufficient rations of bread and meat. She acts in a state of shock, under the effect of an altered state of consciousness, fleeing the horrors of the present, definitely not Frau Trophea, turned to the excitement of carnival. Carnival? Carnivalous. Clementz questions the credibility of main source Johann Wencker, who claims to have access to various eyewitness testimonies but was born in 1590. She also goes on to list several historical inaccuracies before closing with this bombshell of a line. In conclusion, Waller's work is more like a historical novel than a scientific work. So then, why is that and the other papers that Waller wrote that essentially repackaged that information the source on the dancing plague of 1518, except for one small sentence from Elizabeth Clementz basically saying, hey, but people probably didn't die from it though. Now, one thing I want to make absolutely clear is that my frustration is not aimed towards Waller by any means. Doing some light searching on his other books clearly reveals that he aims to make entertaining literature for the general public, not necessarily objective and accurate historical reviews. And if that's his hustle, more power to him. And the problem becomes when the general public regards those books as fact, as is the case with the Wikipedia article. Now, to be fair, the Wikipedia article has changed a lot since I started reading up on this topic. On March 24th, Wikipedia user Aleph Infinity toned down a lot of the reference to Waller, saying as follows: John Waller's book should not be considered a scholarly source. The claims of dancing until death and the encouragement of further dancing by the local authorities does not appear to be well supported by any historical evidence. For those of you keeping track at home, that was the last of the 4 unique claims of documented history that Waller made. That being said, let's take a look at the references of the most recent edition, 10 a.m., May 5th, 2020. Citation 1, Discovery, same as before, written around John Waller's book. Citation 2, John Waller. Citation 3, Queen of Sass, Elizabeth Clementz, ripping apart Waller's book. Citation 4, John Waller, a repeat of Citation 2. Citation 5, Digital Journal, same as before, written around Waller's book. Citations 6 through 9, General Information about Movement Disorders. Citation 10, Crusader Kings 2. It's all still pretty much Waller Nation up in here. Awesome. Now, don't get me wrong, we shouldn't judge his other works based off of the scientific merit or lack thereof of his book, which isn't even directly cited. The articles about his book, yes. That being said, if you read his papers and see how much information they share with each other and the other articles, you start to wonder how different his book actually is from his papers. Now, this is a super long-winded way of me breaching the question, what qualifies as a credible source? Sure, the current language of the Wikipedia article is much more comforting. Some sources claim that people died. Somewhere between 50 and 400 people took to dancing. The controversy section even recognizes that claims of death, a Frau Trophea, etc. from Waller are dubious, but the substance upon which the article is founded is still largely Waller. And I fear for the rest of Wikipedia and what dubious sources go under people's radars every day. No fact check, no doubt. Check your sources. Don't take news for granted. Keep each other accountable in the spread of misinformation. If you go back to day 1 of this article, the very first appearance of the dancing plague of 1518 on the English Wikipedia, you will see the first entry, August 8th, 2008, exactly 1 week after the Discovery article was published. Those who click on the archive link will see a small paragraph with the single source being that same Discovery article. So if Wikipedia is to be an indication of collective knowledge for those who partake in the Age of Information, the entirety of the Dancing Plague of 1518's history for English-speaking people in the Age of Information was at the end of Waller's strings, whether the contributors intended it or not. Had I been in control of Wikipedia Rewind, here are some of the sources I would have tapped instead of Waller Nation, knowing what I know now. Chapter 16 of Religious Dances in the Christian Church and in Popular Medicine by Eugene Backman. The three big sources Clementz mentioned: the Annals of Brant, the Chronicle of Hieronymus Gebweiler, and whatever that document was that was sent from the local magistrate to the bishop. Another potential source of information I found is a museum exhibit on the 1518 dancing plague. Among many other things, it apparently contained a page from the mandates and regulations of the city of Strasbourg that detailed the banning of public dances, signed by the Sebastian Brant. While obviously you can no longer walk the exhibit as it has been taken down, the press kit and the visitor's dossier is still available on the internet. The press kit talks about, among other things, the different units in the museum, and the dossier discusses philosophical quandaries of historians before diving into some brief translations of primary and secondary sources, including some blurbs from the correspondence of the Magistrate of Strasbourg. Finally, Elizabeth Clementz herself. She published 2 papers and a companion book called The Dance of 1518. Those papers are The Dance of 1518 to the Test of the Sources and Documents Concerning the Dance of Saint Guy. In these papers, she supposedly translates contemporary sources of the plague from Old German and then discusses them. I say supposedly, as unfortunately I was not able to get access to the book itself because I am cheap and am doing this for fun, as I said before. But wait, you may say, how can you endorse a non-primary source you haven't read? And that's fair. However, after reading Clement's breakdown of Waller's book and the sources he used while providing more appropriate contemporary sources, I do believe that these 2 papers are worth a shot. Unless you can translate Old German yourself, it will probably be your best bet for the actual primary sources after all. Aside from the sources that should be considered, there's also a lot of things that I found interesting that could be fitting subject matter. Like, for example, for a while people actually thought that the dancing plague of Strasbourg actually took place in 1418, not 1518. Also, the accepted name for the dancing plague, St. Vitus's dance, eventually became a name for an actual neurological condition, but there was a period of time where the term was used for both. Oh, and one more thing. So you may be thinking, why haven't I made these changes to Wikipedia myself? Well, old chum, I can call you chum, right? Like in a cool blokish way, not in like the nasty stuff. Anyway, it's a simple reason really, and I actually mentioned it earlier in this video. It's because I'm illiterate.